Hello and welcome to What the F Just Happened Today, your essential guide to the daily shock and awe in national politics. I'm Joe Amditas. Let's get to it. It's Wednesday, November 10th, 2021. Welcome to day 295. The House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol riot issued new subpoenas to 10 former Trump White House officials, including Kayleigh McEnany and Stephen Miller. The chairman of the select committee, Benny Thompson, said his panel, quote, wants to learn every detail of what went on in the White House on January 6th and in the days beforehand, end quote, including precisely what role, quote, the former president and his aides played in efforts to stop the counting of the electoral votes, and if they were in touch with anyone outside the White House attempting to overturn the outcome of the election, end quote. Among those subpoenaed to provide testimony and documents are John McEntee, the former White House personnel director, Christopher Liddell, former deputy chief of staff, Keith Kellogg, the national security advisor for Pence, Ben Williamson, who was former deputy assistant to Trump and senior advisor to Mark Meadows, and Nicholas Luna, who was Trump's former personal assistant. The subpoenas come a day after the committee issued a different set of subpoenas to 6 former Trump administration and campaign officials, bringing the total number of subpoenas issued to 35. Meanwhile, a federal judge rejected Trump's attempt to keep secret more than 700 pages of records from his White House. The decision by U.S. Judge Tanya Chutkin clears the way for the National Archives to release the documents that were requested by the congressional committee that's investigating January 6th. The documents could be released beginning Friday. Trump's lawyers had argued that the documents requested by the committee, including White House call logs, visitor logs, and schedules related to January 6, and 3 pages of handwritten notes from Trump's then chief of staff, were covered by executive privilege. In her ruling, however, the judge noted that the Biden administration had approved the release of Trump's White House records, saying that there can only be one president at a time, and that Trump's assertion of executive privilege is, quote, outweighed by President Biden's decision not to uphold the privilege, end quote. She added, presidents are not kings and plaintiff is not president. Meanwhile, the Office of Special Counsel found that at least 13 of Trump's senior aides campaigned illegally for his reelection, in violation of the Hatch Act, a law that's designed to prevent federal employees from abusing the power of their offices on behalf of candidates. The special counsel report describes a willing disregard for the law by senior Trump administration officials who, quote, chose to use their official authority not for the legitimate functions of the government, end quote. Special counsel Henry Kerner said Trump's refusal to require compliance with the law, quote, laid the foundation for the violations, end quote, which he called, quote, especially pernicious considering the timing of when many of these violations took place, end quote. The list includes several cabinet officials and top White House aides, including Mike Pompeo, Mark Meadows, and Kayleigh McEnany. No punishments, however, are expected to be doled out because the president in office at the time is the only person who can discipline their top employees. Moving on, nearly 1 million kids ages 5 to 11 will have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine in their first week of eligibility. That represents about 3% of all eligible children, and an additional 700,000 have appointments scheduled in the coming days. The Biden administration also said it will invest an additional $785 million to combat the spread of the virus in communities that are hit hardest by the pandemic, as well as those who are at highest risk of death and disease. White House COVID-19 response coordinator Jeff Zients said the additional American Rescue Plan funding will also be used to build vaccine confidence in communities of color, as well as in rural areas and low-income populations. Meanwhile, people are dying from COVID-19 at a rate 3 times higher in counties where Trump won at least 60% of the vote, compared to counties where Biden won a similar percentage. In October, 25 out of every 100,000 residents in so-called Trump counties died from COVID-19, compared to 7.8 per 100,000 in so-called Biden counties. October was the 5th consecutive month that gap between the death rates in Trump and Biden counties widened. In other news, Nancy Pelosi called for investigations by the House Ethics Committee and law enforcement into Representative Paul Gosar for posting a video depicting him killing Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and swinging 2 swords at Biden. Gosar shared the altered animated video from both his personal and professional Twitter accounts on Sunday. Despite violating Twitter's hateful conduct policy, the tweets have not been removed but instead were labeled with a public interest notice. Nancy Pelosi urged House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy to join in condemning the horrific video and supporting the investigations, saying, quote, "Threats of violence against members of Congress and the President of the United States must not be tolerated," end quote. And finally, the Labor Department reported the largest annual increase in consumer prices in 3 decades. The worse-than-expected inflation rate showed prices have risen 6.2% in October compared with a year ago. Joe Manchin, meanwhile, pointed to the pace of inflation as a reason to pause the $1.75 trillion social spending and climate package, saying that the threat of inflation is getting worse and that lawmakers can no longer ignore the economic pain. Previously, Manchin had suggested that the package could worsen inflation and that he wouldn't support a bill to expand social programs if it irresponsibly adds to the national debt. And in the polls, Monmouth University says 65% of Americans support the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which Congress passed last week. 62% of Americans support the social safety net and climate bill. Only 42%, however, approve of the job that Biden is doing as president. That's all for now. You can find the links and sources for all of these stories on the main website. And as always, visit whatthefjusthappenedtoday.com for the latest news and headlines. Until next time, I'm Joe Amditas.